You brought 6 trucks to steal 14 acres? Those were the first words out of my mouth at 5:48 that Thursday morning, when diesel engines woke me before the cattle did. My name is Ethan Walker. I am 47 years old, and Walker Ridge Farm has been in my family for 3 generations. At that hour, the eastern pasture should have been nothing but fog, fence posts, and the slow white breath of cattle drifting through the Tennessee cold. Instead, headlights swept across my barn wall like searchlights. Gravel cracked beneath heavy tires. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my jacket, and stepped onto the porch with my coffee still steaming in one hand. 6 vehicles were lined up beyond my cattle gate. 2 contractor pickups, a flatbed carrying survey equipment and orange stakes, 2 dark sport utility vehicles, and at the front, a white sport utility vehicle I recognized immediately. Marjorie Whitmore stepped out wearing a navy coat over pressed slacks, carrying a leather folder against her chest. She was 56, president of Cedar Crest Estates, the subdivision that had spent the last 2 years spreading toward my eastern fence line. "Morning, Ethan," she called, like 6 trucks outside my farm before sunrise were perfectly normal. "What is this?" I asked. She walked toward the gate, while 3 contractors climbed from their trucks behind her. One carried marking flags. Another unfolded a clipboard. Marjorie opened her folder and pulled out a document. "As of 6 this morning, this access corridor belongs to Cedar Crest." I looked at her, then at my watch. 5:48. You might want to check the time. Her expression barely moved. "The board approved emergency access. We are beginning preliminary work. On my farm. On the access corridor." That was Marjorie's favorite trick. Change the noun and pretend the ownership changed with it. I set my coffee on the porch rail and walked toward the gate without opening it. The damp air smelled like hay, diesel exhaust, and wet earth. "Show me the recorded easement." She raised the paper. "I have the association resolution." That is not what I asked. One contractor looked toward Marjorie. She ignored him. "You have delayed this community long enough, Ethan. 400 families should not lose emergency access because one farmer refuses to cooperate." I took out my phone and photographed the vehicles, license plates, equipment, gate, and my watch showing 5:49. Then I started recording. Nobody crosses that boundary without recorded authority. Marjorie gave me a thin smile. "You really believe an old fence decides this?" I looked past her toward the eastern pasture. Somewhere beyond the fog was a stone boundary marker my grandfather had shown me when I was 12. The fence had been replaced twice since then. That marker had not moved an inch. "No," I said. "The deed does." My phone vibrated. A message from my wife, Rebecca, asking why I was awake so early. I typed back 3 words, "Trouble at gate." Her reply came almost immediately. Did they cross the recorded boundary? I looked at Marjorie, then at the convoy waiting behind her. She thought she had arrived with enough vehicles, paperwork, and confidence to make a farmer step aside. What she did not know was that my wife understood exactly what happened when people confused a title with lawful authority. Marjorie did not cross the gate that morning. Maybe it was the phone recording every word, or maybe one of her contractors finally realized an HOA resolution was not the same thing as a recorded property right. Either way, the convoy backed down my gravel road at 6:12, leaving tire tracks in the damp shoulder and half a dozen orange stakes still stacked on the flatbed. I watched the last taillights disappear through the fog, then walked straight to the old barn. Walker Ridge covered 186 acres of rolling Tennessee pasture, hardwood creek bottom, hay fields, and enough stubborn red clay to ruin a clean pair of boots before breakfast. My grandfather bought the first section decades ago and added adjoining parcels whenever he could afford them. My father ran cattle here until his knees gave him trouble, and I took over the daily work long before the deed officially carried my name. There was nothing glamorous about it. My morning started with feed, fence checks, water troughs, machinery, weather reports, and coffee strong enough to make the spoon nervous. The barn smelled like hay, leather, diesel fuel, and old lumber warmed by generations of summers. On one wall hung my grandfather's fencing hammer, the wooden handle polished smooth where his hand had held it. I kept it there because some tools deserved retirement without being forgotten. Behind the office door sat a fireproof document box containing the papers that mattered more that morning than every truck Marjorie had brought with her. I carried the box to my kitchen table and opened it. Deed. Tax records. old plats, title documents. Then I found the boundary survey from 1998, folded inside a yellowed envelope. The eastern line ran exactly where I remembered, from the creek bend north toward a limestone marker near the pasture, then along the fence toward the county road. Cedar Crest had not existed when that survey was completed. Neither had Marjorie's HOA. I ran my finger along the old farm road, crossing the eastern section. It had been used for tractors, cattle trailers, and hay equipment for as long as I could remember. It was not labeled as a public road. It was not identified as a Cedar Crest access corridor. It was simply part of Walker Ridge Farm. I pulled on my jacket again and walked nearly 3/4 of a mile toward the eastern pasture. The fog was lifting, revealing cedar trees beyond the fence and rooftops from the newest phase of Cedar Crest in the distance. I found the limestone marker beneath a tangle of winter grass. The top was weathered and stained, but it was still there. I remembered standing beside it at 12 years old while my grandfather told me never to trust memory alone when land was involved. Know where the paper says the line is, he had told me. Then know where the ground says it is. I photographed the marker and surrounding fence line, then looked toward those new rooftops. Marjorie saw 14 acres that could solve a development problem. I saw a pasture my family had paid taxes on, maintained, fenced, and worked for generations. By 8:30, I had the survey spread across my kitchen table beside her HOA. Resolution. One document described ownership. The other described what Marjorie wanted. The difference between those two things was about to become the entire fight. By noon, I understood why 14 acres of cattle pasture had suddenly become an emergency for Cedar Crest. I drove my pickup along the county road bordering the subdivision and stopped where the newest houses climbed the ridge behind rows of fresh landscaping. The development looked polished from a distance, with stone entrance columns, matching mailboxes, young maple trees, and sidewalks so new the concrete was still brighter than the curbs. But the road told the real story. Cedar Crest had one practical route toward the state highway, and every delivery truck, school bus, contractor, and resident had to funnel through it. The eastern side of my farm sat between their newest phase and a much shorter connection. A road across Walker Ridge would not just be convenient. It would make the expansion easier to market. I knew because Marjorie had tried buying that convenience first. 11 months earlier, she had appeared at my kitchen table with Douglas Pierce, the HOA attorney, and offered me $28,000 for a permanent access easement. I had read the proposal twice and declined. The route would have cut directly across grazing land, divided two working pastures, and forced me to redesign fencing and cattle movement around subdivision traffic. 2 months later, the offer became $45,000. I said no again. Marjorie smiled that afternoon and told me I was turning down easy money. I told her easy money had a habit of becoming permanent problems. That should have ended it. Instead, the letters started. First came a complaint about drainage from my eastern pasture. Then a notice claiming farm equipment near the boundary created a visual nuisance for Cedar Crest residents. After that came a carefully worded letter suggesting the old dirt road might represent historic community access. I kept every envelope. I also noticed something else. Each time I refused an offer, the language became less like a request. By winter, Marjorie was no longer asking whether Cedar Crest could use my land. She was discussing when access would begin. I pulled into a roadside turnout and unfolded a copy of the 1998 survey across my steering wheel. The old farm road was there, but nothing connected it to the subdivision because the subdivision had not existed. My phone rang. It was Henry Dawson, whose farm bordered mine to the south. Saw quite a parade at your place this morning, he said. Marjorie says anything to you about an access road? I asked. Henry gave a dry laugh. She asked me last year whether your eastern lane ever connected to the county road. I told her tractors used it. That was about it. Did you ever know it as public access? Never. I thanked him and drove home. A certified envelope was waiting in my mailbox. Cedar Crest Estates. Inside was a new notice stating that the board had recognized an existing community access interest and intended to exercise that interest for emergency connectivity. I read the sentence 3 times. No deed reference. No recorded easement number. No court order. Just increasingly confident words printed on expensive letterhead. I laid it beside the earlier purchase offers on my kitchen table. That was when the pattern became impossible to miss. First, they had offered to buy the right to cross my farm. When I refused to sell it, they started pretending they already had it. The orange survey flags appeared 2 mornings later, bright against the frost like somebody had planted warning lights across my pasture. I spotted the first one while checking a water trough shortly after 7. Then another stood 30 yards farther north, and another beyond that, forming a crooked line inside my fence. I parked the tractor, photographed every flag exactly where I found it, then pulled them carefully from the soil and carried them back to the barn. None had a county marking. None identified a licensed survey company. By 9:15, Marjorie Whitmore was coming up my driveway in her white sport utility vehicle. She stepped out holding the same leather folder I had seen at the gate. "You removed association survey markers," she said. "I removed stakes somebody placed on my property without permission." She opened the folder and handed me a copy of Cedar Crest's emergency access resolution. The paper had a board seal, signatures, and enough formal language to look impressive from 10 feet away. I read it slowly. The board had voted to recognize what it called a necessary emergency corridor across the eastern portion of Walker Ridge Farm. What it did not contain was a deed reference, recorded easement, county authorization, or court order. Where is the document giving Cedar Crest ownership or access rights? I asked. Marjorie's jaw tightened. The board has already established the community interest. Your board can vote on Cedar Crest property. It cannot vote my farm into Cedar Crest. She gave me the patient smile people use when they think explaining something twice makes it true. You are one farmer standing in the way of 400 families. I looked past her toward the pasture. Morning sunlight was burning the last frost from the grass, and cattle were gathering near the fence where my father had replaced posts 15 years earlier. Then 400 families deserve to know what you actually own. The smile disappeared. The convoy will return, Ethan. Next time we will have the authority necessary to take possession of the corridor. I folded the resolution once and handed it back. Bring the recorded document. She did not take it immediately. You really do not understand how far this has gone. I understand exactly how far your trucks got Thursday morning. They stopped at my gate. She snatched the paper, turned, and walked back toward her vehicle. I waited until she drove away before carrying the orange stakes into the barn office. I labeled a feed sack with the date and location and placed them inside rather than throwing them away. Then I uploaded the photographs from my phone, including wide shots showing each marker relative to the fence. By lunchtime, I had called Caleb Morgan, a licensed county surveyor who had worked neighboring properties for years. I emailed him the 1998 survey, the deed description, and photographs of the limestone marker. He agreed to come Monday and retrace the eastern boundary. That evening, Rebecca called while I was feeding cattle. Wind rattled the metal roof above me, and I could hear highway noise faintly through her phone. "I will be home tomorrow night," she said. "Do not argue with them. Preserve everything." "Already doing it." "Good." There was a short pause. "And Ethan, if they come back before I get there, stay out of the path of the vehicles." I looked toward the gate where the convoy had waited 2 mornings earlier. "I will." When I hung up, I realized Marjorie had made one mistake bigger than the orange stakes. She had finally stopped pretending this was a negotiation. Now I could stop treating it like one. Rebecca came home just after 8 the next evening, carrying a garment bag over one shoulder and a small overnight case in her left hand. I heard her car on the gravel before I saw the headlights sweep across the kitchen window. By then I had turned the table into something between a farm office and a records archive. The 1998 survey lay beside the deed, tax maps, Marjorie's purchase offers, the certified access notice, photographs of the orange stakes, and printed stills from my gate camera. Rebecca stepped inside, kissed my cheek, smelled the coffee in the pot, and looked at the paperwork. "That bad?" she asked. "Worse than Thursday." She changed into jeans and a gray sweatshirt, poured coffee, and sat across from me. Most people who met Rebecca away from work would never guess what she did for a living. She was 45, calm almost to a fault, and more likely to spend a Sunday repairing pasture fence with me than talking about her job. But Colonel Rebecca Walker commanded a state police division, and she had spent enough years around official procedures to recognize the difference between authority and somebody merely printing the word authority on letterhead. She read everything without interrupting me. When she reached Marjorie's emergency resolution, she went back to the first page and read it again. "Has anyone shown you a recorded easement?" "No." "Court order?" "No." "County authorization?" "Nothing." I told her about the orange stakes and Caleb Morgan coming Monday to retrace the boundary. Rebecca nodded. Good. Let the surveyor establish the line independently. I leaned back. So what happens if they come again? She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. First, I stay out of it. I stared at her. You stay out of it? This is our property, Ethan. That makes it personal. I cannot use my position to settle a dispute involving my own farm. There was no hesitation in her voice. Tomorrow morning, I am documenting the conflict through my chain of command. If anything develops that legitimately involves state personnel, operational decisions go through someone else. I had expected Rebecca to know what to do. I had not expected the first thing she did to be removing herself from the decision. She reached for my phone and scrolled through the photographs. You did this right. Wide shots, timestamps, landmarks. Keep the original files. Do not edit them. Keep every letter and envelope. If anyone comes onto the property, do not stand in front of vehicles and do not touch their equipment. Record from somewhere safe. And call who? Your attorney first about the property claim. The appropriate local authority if someone actually enters after clear notice. Do not call me as Colonel Walker. Call me as your wife. That sentence stayed with me. Before bed, we carried the fireproof box back into the office, but Rebecca left the survey on the kitchen table. Her duty phone buzzed once beside it. She read the message, typed a short response, and turned the screen face down. Done, she said. Conflict disclosed. Outside, the cattle shifted quietly beyond the barn, and wind moved through the bare trees along the eastern pasture. Marjorie thought the biggest surprise waiting for her was my wife's rank. Sitting across from Rebecca that night, I realized it was something much harder to fight. She knew exactly where her authority ended. Monday morning arrived cold and clear, with frost shining along the eastern fence when Caleb Morgan pulled into my driveway at 7:20. His survey truck carried equipment that looked nothing like the unmarked orange stakes Marjorie had sent onto my pasture. Caleb spent nearly 4 hours working from recorded descriptions, established monuments, old plats, and modern measurements. I stayed out of his way. Rebecca had already left for work, and before driving away, she reminded me of the rule we had agreed on. Document everything. Interfere with nothing. Shortly before noon, Caleb found the limestone marker beneath the winter grass. He cleaned the top, checked his measurements again, then looked toward the cedar crest rooftops. Your old survey is holding up, he said. The retraced eastern boundary followed the recorded description almost exactly where my family had treated it for decades. More importantly, the dirt farm road Marjorie called an access corridor remained inside Walker Ridge Farm. Caleb placed legitimate survey markers along the verified line and prepared a signed survey showing what his fieldwork confirmed. That afternoon, my land use attorney, Daniel Mercer, sent Cedar Crest Estates and Douglas Pierce a formal notice stating that the HOA had produced no recorded easement authorizing entry across the identified portion of my property. The letter also instructed the association and its contractors not to enter while the ownership and access claims were disputed. I sent the notice by certified delivery and saved digital copies beside everything else. Then I started building the least impressive defense imaginable. Paper. Lots of it. Deed records. Tax maps. Title history. Caleb's updated survey. Photographs of the limestone marker. Gate camera footage from the first convoy. Images of the unauthorized orange stakes before I removed them. Marjorie's purchase offers. Her later letters claiming access. Rebecca helped me organize the timeline that evening, but she never contacted Cedar Crest and never called anyone on my behalf. Her formal conflict disclosure had already been acknowledged through her command structure. Keep my job out of your communications, she told me. This needs to stand without me. So it did. I installed 2 additional security cameras on buildings I owned, both aimed toward the farm entrance and eastern lane. I checked that their clocks matched my phone. Near the verified boundary, I posted simple private property signs without blocking the road or creating any hazard. I did not build a barricade. I did not park machinery across the lane. I did not touch Cedar Crest property. By Wednesday night, every relevant document had a date, every photograph had an original file, and every camera was recording. The farm itself looked almost unchanged. Cattle moved between pastures. The tractor started reluctantly in the cold. Hay dust floated through the barn whenever I opened a bale. But underneath that ordinary routine, something had shifted. Marjorie had spent months trying to turn confidence into authority. I was doing the opposite. I was stripping the argument down until only verifiable facts remained. At 9:16 that night, an email arrived from Cedar Crest. It contained one sentence from Douglas Pierce. The association intends to proceed pursuant to its previously stated position. I read it twice, printed it, and placed it at the end of the timeline. Rebecca looked at the page and said nothing for several seconds. Then she glanced toward the dark kitchen window. Make sure the cameras are charged. I already had. What neither of us knew was that before sunrise, those cameras were going to record the exact moment Marjorie's paperwork finally met the property line. At 5:51 Thursday morning, the first contractor truck crossed the surveyed boundary. I know the exact time because camera 2 caught the headlights moving past Caleb Morgan's marker while my phone recorded the same scene from beside the barn. Diesel engines rolled through the cold air, cattle shifted behind me, and 6 sets of headlights turned the eastern lane almost white. The convoy had returned exactly 1 week after Marjorie's first attempt. This time the gate had been opened from the county road side, and the lead pickup moved slowly onto Walker Ridge Farm. I stayed more than 100 feet away, nowhere near its path. Behind it came the flatbed, another pickup, and Marjorie's white sport utility vehicle. She stepped out wearing a dark coat and carrying her leather folder. "Ethan," she called. "You were notified." I kept recording. "You received Daniel Mercer's letter?" Our attorney responded. "That was not my question." She glanced toward the contractors. 2 men began unloading orange steaks. I checked my phone. 5:53. "Marjorie, your resolution says the corridor becomes operational at 6. Her eyes narrowed. "Preparatory access is authorized." "By who?" "By Cedar Crest." I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about watching somebody repeat the same mistake with more confidence. I zoomed toward Caleb's legitimate marker, then back toward the lead truck sitting beyond it. The camera had everything: the property sign, survey marker, vehicle, timestamp, and Marjorie standing beside the lane. At 5:55, I called the county non-emergency dispatch number and explained that contractors had entered private farm property after receiving written notice disputing any right of access. I gave my name, address, attorney's information, and told the dispatcher nobody was being threatened and I was remaining away from the vehicles. Then I called Daniel. He answered on the 3rd ring. They came back. They crossed at 5:51. "Do not interfere with them. Keep recording." "Already doing it." Marjorie started walking toward me, but stopped well short of the barn. "Calling your wife?" she asked. "No." That seemed to surprise her. "I know Rebecca works for the state," she said. "If you think having a police wife changes a property dispute, you are mistaken." I lowered the phone just enough to look directly at her. "For once, we agree." At 5:58, another contractor unfolded a site plan across the hood of a pickup. Marjorie pointed toward the pasture as if the road already belonged to her. I photographed the scene and stepped back inside the barn doorway, keeping myself completely clear of their work area. 6 o'clock came and went. Nothing magical happened. No deed changed. No boundary moved. No easement appeared in the county records. At 6:07, vehicles approached from the county road. The first belonged to local authorities responding to the property complaint. Behind it came a county vehicle. Marjorie's posture changed immediately. She closed her folder and walked toward the gate. I stayed where I was. The officers spoke first with her, then with the contractors, then came to me. I handed over Daniel's notice and Caleb's signed survey without adding anything dramatic. One officer studied the boundary map, looked toward the markers, and asked, "You have camera footage of when they entered?" I held up my phone. From 2 angles. Behind him, Marjorie was already talking faster than before. She had arrived believing 6 trucks would make her claim look official. Instead, by sunrise, she had given my cameras something her paperwork never could: a timestamp showing exactly when confidence crossed the line into my property. For the next 20 minutes, Marjorie tried to turn a property line into an argument about influence. She stood beside her white sport utility vehicle with the leather folder pressed against her coat, while the local officer compared Caleb Morgan's signed survey with the documents she had brought. The contractors had stopped unloading equipment. Their orange stakes remained on the flatbed, and the lead pickup sat quietly beyond the surveyed line, where camera 2 had recorded it entering at 5:51. The county representative arrived a few minutes later and began reviewing the boundary information independently. Marjorie pointed toward me. His wife commands a state police division, she said. This entire response is compromised. The officer looked at me, then back at her. Ma'am, we responded to a property complaint through normal dispatch. I want someone in command notified. I said nothing. That was the moment she finally understood enough of Rebecca's position to think she had found a weapon against me. What she did not know was that Rebecca had already removed that weapon days earlier. A supervising official made several calls while standing near the county vehicle. When he returned, his voice was calm. Colonel Walker disclosed her personal interest in this property through her chain of command before this incident. She is recused from any operational decision related to this matter. Marjorie blinked. Recused? She has no role in what happens here. For the first time since the convoy arrived, Marjorie had no immediate answer. I almost felt the whole morning change. Temperature. She had expected Rebecca's rank to either frighten her or give her a reason to claim favoritism. Instead, Rebecca's absence became one more piece of documentation Marjorie could not argue around. The officials returned to the records. My deed identified Walker Ridge Farm. Caleb's survey traced the eastern boundary. Daniel Mercer's certified notice showed Cedar Crest had been formally told that its claimed access right was disputed. My cameras showed the convoy entering after that notice. And Marjorie's own resolution stated 6 o'clock, while the first truck crossed the verified line 9 minutes earlier. Nobody needed Rebecca to interpret any of it. The documents were doing that themselves. Douglas Pierce arrived shortly after 7, looking considerably less confident than Marjorie. He read Daniel's letter, studied Caleb's survey, then asked Marjorie quietly whether she had brought documentation for a recorded easement. She opened her folder and handed him the board resolution. He looked at it, then at her. I mean the recorded instrument. She said something too quietly for me to hear. His expression answered for her. After further discussion, the contractors were instructed not to continue work across the disputed private property while the access claim was addressed through the proper legal channels. Engines started again. One by one, the trucks backed toward the county road. Nothing was seized. Nothing was damaged. The farm remained exactly where it had been before sunrise. Marjorie was the last to leave. Before getting into her vehicle, she looked across the pasture at me. I expected another speech about 400 families. Instead, she closed the door without saying anything. By 7:32, the eastern lane was quiet again. Rebecca called 10 minutes later. I heard there was an incident. There was. Everything all right. I looked at the limestone marker catching the first warm sunlight of the morning. The farm is still here. She laughed softly. Good. What I did not tell her was that Marjorie had finally learned who my wife was, and it had changed absolutely nothing. That was the part one liked most. Rebecca's rank had never saved Walker Ridge Farm. Her integrity had protected the process, and Marjorie's own paperwork had done the rest. 3 weeks later, I stood beside the eastern fence with my grandfather's old fencing hammer in one hand and a new cedar post leaning against my shoulder. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across Walker Ridge Farm, and the cattle were moving slowly toward the lower pasture while the smell of fresh hay drifted from the barn. The 14 acres had not moved. The limestone marker had not moved. What had changed was Cedar Crest. Daniel Mercer called me 2 days after the convoy left to say the HOA had produced no recorded easement establishing the access right Marjorie had claimed. Caleb Morgan's updated survey was filed with the rest of my property records, and Cedar Crest formally abandoned its attempt to treat the eastern lane as an established community corridor. The development could pursue whatever lawful alternatives remained available, but it could not simply vote itself across my farm. Then the homeowners started asking questions. Why had money been spent on contractors before the access claim was resolved? Why had Marjorie described the corridor as established when the association had previously offered to purchase an easement from me? Why had trucks entered after Cedar Crest received written notice disputing its authority? Those questions did what my arguments never could. At the next association meeting, Marjorie's leadership was challenged, and before the month ended, she was no longer president. I did not attend. I heard about it from Henry Dawson while we were loading feed. By then, I had lost interest in watching her fall. I only wanted my farm quiet again. Rebecca came home early that Friday wearing jeans, boots, and a navy sweater, looking nothing like the Colonel Marjorie had eventually discovered she was. She found me replacing the post near the old limestone marker. Need help? She asked. Hold this straight. She wrapped both hands around the cedar while I checked the line. For a minute, neither of us said anything. Wind moved through the grass. Somewhere near the barn, a gate hinge squeaked. Beyond our property, the rooftops of Cedar Crest caught the orange light of sunset. You know what is strange? I said. Marjorie thought your rank was going to decide this. Rebecca smiled. Did it? I set the hammer against the post and checked it one last time. No, that was the truth I kept coming back to. Rebecca never ordered anyone onto my farm. She never called a subordinate to fix my problem. She never used a badge, title, or command position to change the outcome. The moment our property became involved, she documented the conflict and stepped away. What protected Walker Ridge was much less dramatic. A deed in a fireproof box, a survey completed years before Cedar Crest existed, a limestone marker my grandfather had shown me when I was 12, certified letters Marjorie ignored, and cameras that remembered 5:51 in the morning better than anyone could rewrite it later. I drove the final post into place, then stepped back beside Rebecca. The fence line ran across the pasture exactly where it always had. No convoy, no orange stakes, no leather folder declaring somebody else's wishes were suddenly my obligations. Just cattle, cold evening air, and 186 acres my family still owned. They came believing authority could overpower ownership. In the end, the loudest thing on my farm was not a siren or a command. It was a piece of paper nobody could argue with.